Attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, I guess we're on. Hi, my name is Blaine Carter. I'm Oracle's developer advocate for open source, and I'm here with Martin. Go ahead and...
Yeah, I'm Martin D'Souza. I'm with Insum Solutions. Primarily do a lot of Apex development and PL/SQL, but also do a lot of open source development as well.
All right, so today we're here to talk about Git and look at some GitHub repositories. Now, when we go through, we're going to do some demos. You know, the stuff I'm going to cover at the beginning is going to simply be some very basic. Here's what Git is. Here's how to do a check-in, check-out, that type of thing. Just so you know, I was planning on doing everything on this computer over here, and I had some issues. So I had to switch here, so I may stumble a little bit as I'm jumping back and forth between computers. Of course, you know, got to have a last-minute glitch. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my camera and switch over to sharing my desktop. And let me move this over here. All right, so Git. You know, most people, I can't imagine anybody has not heard of Git at this point, but you may be wondering why you want to use Git. And I'm sure if we look hard enough on the internet, we might be able to find someone to argue with over what's the best version control system out there. In my opinion, the very best version control system is the one that you will actually use. If you're not using some type of version control, you should be. And Git is a really good one to use, and I'll be going over some of the basics. So here's a little story. So about a year ago, I was speaking with a gentleman from South America who had said that they were using Subversion and they were considering moving over to Git, but the area that they were in had bad internet connections. They were going down all the time. And so they didn't want to switch to Git because they were concerned that they couldn't connect to the central repository. Now, that's actually a very good reason why you would want to use Git, because Git is a distributed version control system rather than just a central server. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're using Subversion. You want to check in, check out from Subversion, you have to connect to the server. If you want to use Git, when you install Git local, it actually installs a full version of Git on your desktop, on your machine. So you can work without a wire. You can be completely offline in airplane mode and still do check-ins, still do commits, and then when you finally get connected back up to the system, you can push all of those commits back up. And we'll go over how to do most of that. Check my notes on the other machine. Sorry about that. Let's take a look and get started. So I assume everyone can see my screen here. Can you see that, Martin? The browser?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And if I could just add one thing on SVN versus Git, just to really reemphasize, is most people, like you said, use SVN or Git, or hopefully one of those. SVN has that you work on your desktop and you check into a server somewhere, whether that's online or within your corporate environment. Git, you actually check into your local server first and then merge all those changes with a global server. And it's decentralized in that sense.
Right. And you can also, I mean, this is a little more advanced than we're even going to talk about here, but you can have multiple global servers and you can push to multiple sources. Like you could have a repository in your company and on GitHub and on GitLab and push to all three of those. So it's kind of nice that way. So to get started with Git, you go to this website, git.scm.com. You run the download and install it. Now, I've already downloaded Git and installed it on my machine. Like I said, I had some technical issues to switch over to this older machine, so you'll notice when I do my git minus version, I'm on a really old version of Git. I didn't have time to get my Git updated after the other one broke, but this will work just fine. once you get installed, that's the best way to check to make sure everything worked well, is you just do a git -- version. Okay, so
and for the Mac users out there, you don't really need to download and install it. You can just use Xcode. You won't get the latest and greatest, but Xcode comes with Git and bundled in it.
Oh, that's nice. Maybe I should look into Mac at some point. Right, so I'm just going to cover a few of the basic terms on Git. We're not going to get into anything really advanced. So we're going to talk about how to get a repository started either through clone or init. We're going to look at how to do an add your code in, commit your changes, and how to do a push and a pull, and a couple little things around that. So to get started, let's see what's in our directory that we're in. Now you're seeing why I don't use this machine. It's really slow. We're going to make a directory.
While you're loading this up, I just want to emphasize Blaine's showing you the command line. And for most people, if you use SVN, for instance, you're used to something called Tortoise in Windows that has a nice GUI that you can do all this stuff in. And when you get to Git, you're like, where is the GUI? And we'll talk about a GUI tool after. But what's really important with Git is you actually understand how to do it from command line, because it's very quick. It's not obvious at first. One person that's actually on Blaine's team, Dan McGann, when I was first starting Git, he had recommended, he's like, spend the time and learn the command line tools. You don't have to know all of them, but the major ones that Blaine's going to show. It's a worthwhile investment, because once you know how to do it, you'll find that your understanding of Git is so much better than you could possibly ever get from a command line.
Right, and try it from the command line. There are so many different options in the different GUIs that it's good to just know what the GUI is doing behind the scenes. It's I'm one of those ones. I like to break things and tear them apart and see how they work, and so I kind of get stuck in command line for the fun of it.
One last thing, Blaine. Just if you guys have questions, for the people that are online, you can just type in your question box, and we'll be monitoring, and we'll try and answer them as quick as possible, or if not, at the end if we miss it.
All right. So the first thing we want to do is let's make a file. So this is a file, and we're going to save as. Let me get into, like I said, sorry for the little bit of delay here. I had everything all nice and set up on the other machine ready to go. We'll call this file 1. And then we will make a new file, and we'll call it, and we'll say another file, and we'll make this file 2. All right, so we have 2 files in our directory. Now, a really useful thing to do if you're on the command line is to always run Git Status just to see where you're at. Oh, I guess, sorry, that shows us that I haven't created the Git repository yet. So, see, it's a good thing to run Git Status. Now, if you're starting fresh, like I am, you're going to have no Git repository in the directory that you're in. So you want to initialize a new directory. So git init creates a new Git repository. Now if we do Git Status, you'll see that we actually have a Git repository, and there are 2 files that have not been checked in. If we take a look at the contents of the directory with my really slow machine, you'll see that we now have a .git directory. And if we look inside the .git directory, you'll see a bunch of stuff in here. You should rarely ever have to come in to the Git directory. Just let it do its thing. If you're doing some really advanced stuff, you may come in here, but for now we're just going to ignore it. Just know this is where all of your changes are saved. And the Git repository is actually in the directory of the files that you're tracking. So it's in this project 1 right there. So we've installed Git, we've initialized our repository, and we've created a couple files. Now we want to get those files into Git so that Git is tracking them. We'll do a git add, and we'll give it a file 1. Okay, now if we check the status, you'll see that file 1 is staged and file 2 is not. Now if you accidentally stage a file and you don't want to, you didn't really intend to get that into Git yet, Git has a really nice feature when you're on the command line. This says these are the files to be committed, but it also shows you, just in case you messed up, here's how you unstage that file. It gives you the command directly in the status. And down here it says these are the files that are...
Maybe talk about what staging is and how that differentiates from SVN, because people, that's a new concept for people that are new to Git that sometimes can get confusing.
Actually, I can set up another thing real quick if you want to cover that. Give me just a second to set up another directory that I'm missing.
Okay. Yeah, so Blaine's talking about staging. Now, with SVN, it's almost a all or nothing commit in terms of you go in and you do some work, and let's say you've modified 5 files. If you go on, you pretty much at that point in time have to click on either the entire directory or just single choose those files and then say, okay, I want to commit those files. And in command line, that can actually get very difficult, because if you've edited files in, if you look at a directory tree that goes like this and has multiple tiered layers, it can be hard to actually select all the files you want for a given commit. At least in the command line, the GUI makes it a little easier. What staging does is think of it as the intent to commit. So I want to commit all these files, so you can manually cherry pick each one within the project, and then when you're ready to, you can say, okay, now I'm actually ready to commit everything that I've bundled. It's almost like a checkout cart for committing. So I want to purchase all these items, I want to commit all these items, and only once you're ready do you actually click, or you actually check or commit them in this case. There are other things behind the scenes, but I'm just trying to simplify that. Would you agree with that, Blaine, description?
I would, yes. That, yeah, good. And that gave me enough time to get switched over to a better tool. And like I said, sorry for not being prepared. I am very prepared on that other machine over there that won't connect. But so back to where I was. So now we have file 1 is staged, file 2 is not staged, and we'd like to get file 2. Actually, let me just double check. Okay, good. So we want to get file 2 in. Now let's say you have 10,000 files and you don't want to simply add all day. You can do a git add dot, and that says add everything from here down. Let's show the status. So git add is basically add everything. And then you'll want to run status to make sure that you didn't get something in that you did not intend to get in. So from there, we want to do the actual commit. Now, Git Commit is actually, think of this in Subversion as doing the actual check-in. This is putting it in your local repository. Everything I'm doing right now is in my personal copy, my local repository. So my own personal version control. So when you do it this way with git commit -m, the -m is a message, and it's really meant to be a very quick message. It's not meant to be, you know, super long and verbose. Just simply get it committed. And now if we look at Git Status, we'll see that we're on branch master, and it says there's nothing to commit and the working directory is clean. That means there's been no changes since the last time we had a successful commit. So let's make a change, and we'll save that, and you'll notice now file 2 has been modified again. So before I check this one in, let's say that, let me have a look at, make sure I put the, boy, this machine is slow. Now you see why I don't use this machine. Okay, you'll notice I have a build directory here. If I were to go in and add another file, don't check me in, and I add that file to the build directory, let's see, file 3.txt. Okay, so add that into the build directory, and I go back to here and I do a git status. You'll notice it says there's some changes in the build directory, but it doesn't tell me the actual file. But I don't actually want the build directory in Git. There's no reason to check in the build. It may be log files. You don't want to check in the log files. So for that, we will make a new file, and we're going to tell it, okay, we're going to call it git ignore. So dot git ignore. We put that in the system, and we tell it to ignore anything in the build directory. Notice the slash at the end tells it to ignore the build directory. This time when we run the git status, we see that we've modified file 2, and we see that git ignore is now a new file. We do want to track git ignore in the repository because as the system grows, git ignore is going to change, but we want to make sure that we ignore the things that we want to ignore, so we keep that current, but we do not want build in there. So now
the other reason why you want to, the git ignore is actually part of the entire project, especially when you're working in group projects. Blaine somewhat touched base on the logs, for instance, but other times is you probably want to ignore config files, let's say that have database connections, because we're in an Oracle space here, or passwords or something that are very specific to users' computers, not the actual overall project. And so that's why git ignore is for everyone. It's not just for yourself.
Right, and I tend to have a git ignore that I keep dragging from project to project. It just gets bigger and bigger, and it's kind of a peace of mind thing for me. It keeps my files that I might forget tracked. So I'm going to add all of these files, and we'll check it, see that they're both staged. Now this time I'm going to do just a regular git commit. I'm not going to put the -m, and this is going to take us into, if you're familiar with VI or Vim, this is that type of interface. This comes with Git, and I'm going to go into the insert mode, and this time I can add a really long message with carriage returns and everything. Okay, so I can put a much more verbose message into this interface than the -m, and format a little bit better, and it looks nicer. WQ, and that's saved there. Let's do a git status. Now I've done a couple commits, and if I want to go back and see what commits have happened, you can always look at git log. Now this is the very basic default view of git log. There are ways to add other parameters to really show you the file, show you a lot more information. This is just kind of the basic view, and you're probably going to wind up using a GUI at some point, so we're not going to go too deep into what we can do here, just to show you that when you do git log, it shows us our 2 commits, and they are ordered by the one on the top is the newest. So you can see here was my very quick message, and here was my really long message.
One other thing that's for, again, I'm trying to translate for people from SVN. So I'm going to go with the assumption that people in the audience know SVN is, you'll notice that the 2 commits, the lines in yellow, have some randomized string. In SVN, you're used to commit numbers, sequential commit numbers. And again, that's because a client connects to, everyone connects to one single server. With Git, it's a decentralized repository, so you can't have these sequential numbers because you don't know them. So what that commit value there is, it's actually a hash function of something. And so that way you can remain consistent across all the different, I couldn't say even servers, but all the different computers, let's just say, that are using it, and it will work. So it's not going to be a sequential number, and sometimes when you're looking at Git logs or something, you're just going to see the last little bit of the hash, so something like around where the E starts, and yeah, somewhere around there, you'll see that instead of the full hash. For if you're just starting off, they're one and the same thing. It's just a shortcut to the actual full thing. So just remember, when you see these hash values, they're really the same thing as commit numbers in SVN. They're just longer and bigger and more randomized.
Right. And one thing Git will do is, if you're trying to reference a specific commit, you don't, like Mark was saying, you don't need the entire number. You can give it, if we just gave it E, it would go and see which one it could find that was unique. So out of these 2, 4E or 74E would be enough to identify this specific commit. But as it grows, you may get another one that's 74E, and that starts causing problems. So the more of the number you use, the more likely you'll hit the commit you're looking for.
And most people, I think, include 5 or 6 by default. But when you're getting to that level, usually GUIs help out a lot.
Yeah, and remember, everything I'm showing is not intended for you to do this long term. This is not a command line only tool. I'm just that guy that I like to use the command line. It helps me learn faster. One thing I missed, since my notes are on the other computer, and I'm going to back up a little bit here. After we did the install, there are a couple configs that you need to put in the system. The first time you install Git, you want to make sure that you put in, and this, we're going to do these as global commits. Make sure I type everything correctly. We need to tell Git who I am. So I am Blaine Carter, and that will set that in Git. So when I do a commit or a push or a pull, it will tag it with Blaine Carter is the one who did this. And then git config -- global. The other one that you should set is user.email. And that's blaine.carter@oracle.com. Please don't send me spam. And there is the other one. So now it will tag, though, and that's global. So whichever Git repository you're working on this machine, it's going to tag with Blaine Carter and my email address. If you are working on a different project, you want to use a different name and or email address, you can set these per project. Just do a search online. It'll show you how to do that. It's pretty simple. But that was one step that I had missed. All right, so back to where we were. Now let's say one thing we want to check is we have a change, and let's do a Git status. So I went to lunch. I came back. I do a Git status, and I notice file 1 has been modified. And I don't remember changing file 1 before I left. So I can go in and see what is the diff and just do a git diff. And this will show us that file 1 was changed, some text was added. The green, this shows that we added this in at the end. Now I'm going to get some, you may notice some references to new lines with what I'm doing because I'm doing this on a Windows box and I had everything set up for a Linux box. Git will convert the new lines. It's not something you need to worry about at this stage, but just be aware if you see that in what I'm doing, just pretend that's not there because I didn't have time to set everything up correctly. But anyway, so this is the diff, and the GUI diffs are a lot better. Most of the tools will actually give you a side-by-side comparison and let you, and if you get into a merge conflict, the GUI tools will let you shuffle code back and forth between the screens. It's really nice. But I'm saying that I didn't make this change. Maybe the cat happened to come in and step on the keyboard and just very skillfully step on Control-S and save that file. So I want to get rid of those changes. I want to roll them back. Now I have not committed yet, so this is in a pre-staged file. I can go in and just do a git checkout file 1, and if you'll watch up here, when I do that, it will say the program's been modified and that went away. So if you make a mistake, that's how you roll it back pre-commit. Now if you need to roll back an actual commit, that's a touch more involved. I'm not going to do that here. Just know it's easier with a GUI tool, and if you need to do it at command line, read the docs. By the way, the docs on the Git website are excellent. If you run through all of this, you will know more about Git than I do. But so what we've covered so far is download Git, install Git, initialize Git, set the configs, checking in, checking out files for SVN terminology, and that's the very basic of working with a Git repository on your local machine. Now, if you want to work with a Git repository that's say in your company server or on GitHub, let's go to I have to, like I said, everything was GitHub Oracle, github.com Oracle /dino date. All right, so here's a project that we've been working on in the developer advocates team. This is called DinoDate. It's a dating service for some dinosaurs we discovered on an island in the Bermuda Triangle. It's kind of just a fun little silly app that we use to demonstrate different features in different languages. So there's a Node.js middle tier, a Python middle tier. Right now the front end is written in Angular. We're switching that over to Jet, and then all of the database stuff is in here. I'm going to really go into DinoDate. I'm just going to use this as a sample remote repository. So I come here, I have DinoDate, and I want to start working on the code in the remote repository. If you go to this green button here and get the URL that it gives you. Now there are two different ways you can do HTTPS or SSH. Right now we're just going to use the SSH. Once I have that, I'm going to go back up to the level here, and I want to explain a slight difference. So with Git init is for I'm starting a new project, I'm the first one to do stuff, I want to start this in Git. You actually go into the project itself, that's why we are in the project 1 directory, and you do your Git init there. If you're going to start on a pre-existing Git repository, you're going to do what's called a clone the first time. So you want to be in the directory above where you want the new directory to be. So I'm going to git clone and paste in that URL that I got. Hopefully all my internet's set up right. All right, good. So you'll notice that now I have a directory called DinoDate. If I cd into DinoDate and look in there, you'll see that eventually I have all of the files from GitHub pulled down locally. Now the first time you clone a project, you use git clone. From then on, as long as you don't destroy this project, if you navigate into the DinoDate directory, when you want to sync down from any changes, let's say Martin and I are working on this together, and he has made changes, at the start of my workday, I'm going to do a git pull. And that is sync down, and it syncs the entire repository down, and it's just the diffs, so you don't have to worry about a big download. That's the main reason you don't want to use clone, you want to use pull. But this pulls all the changes down, then I go about and I do my work, I make changes, and I'm ready to send my changes back up to the repository. The command for that is git push, but a good practice, especially if you're using the command line, is to make sure after you've done your changes, you want to do another git pull first, because what this does is this pulls down all current changes, and it's actually a combination command. It does a fetch, which pulls down the changes, and then it does a merge, all in one command. Now if Martin and I had worked on the same file, at this point I would get a merge conflict, and the rule is whoever pulls last gets to fix the merge conflict. And so after I fix the merge conflict, then I would do another git pull just to make sure that he's not working way ahead of me. And when that is clean, then you do a git push. And I'm not going to push this back up because I'm not sure I have everything set right. But a git push pushes all of your changes back up. And by all of your changes, I'm talking about all of the commits that you've made throughout the day. Remember, you're working local on your machine, not against the server. So if Martin's on the server and working remotely, he does a pull, he's going to see my 24 commits that I've made throughout the day, not just one giant, here's everything I worked on. And that's, everything else is the same of what I just showed you before. Rather than push and pull, all of the local work you would do is with the git add, the git commit, all of that is the same. It's just at the end of the day, or however frequently, think of this as with Subversion. Anytime you would have done a check out, you'll do a git pull. Anytime you would do a check in, you'll do a git pull, git push. And that kind of lines up your work. You just get all of the extra commits in there as a bonus. Does that sound right, Martin? Have I missed anything?
Yeah, so pull is the equivalent, again, overgeneralizing, pull is the equivalent of an SVN update, right? You're updating from the server. Push is the only thing that really doesn't equivalate to SVN, because a commit is really pushing your changes up to the server, but you've already committed to the repository, so it's more taking the, as you said, Blaine, the committed things that you've done locally and then really finalizing them on the master server.
It's just a sync in either direction, basically.
Yeah.
If I'm using multiple origins, there's another keyword for you. I can push this to GitHub. I can push it to GitLab. I can push it to my company server. That's kind of a nice thing. If you're going to do something like that, that's way more advanced than we really want to get into. But if you're going to do that, it's nice to have something that you consider to be the single source of truth. That's the one server that if it gets out of sync, that one will override the rest of them. But we're not really going to get into that. At this point, I think we're ready to switch over and let Martin take over to show you a little bit more about how to work with Git repositories on some of the hosting systems out there.
All right, perfect.
So let's unshare my desktop and share Martin's.
Martin, are you there? Did we lose you?
I see Martin is frozen on my camera. All right, let's give him a second to get reconnected. Oh,
yep.
There we are.
Am I back? Yeah, just perfect timing. Couldn't have done any better. That I completely crashed right when I was going to get the screen. So let me, first of all, are there any questions? I haven't seen any questions pop up, but if you do have any questions, please let me know. None so far? Okay. Karen, can you give me share access? I still don't see.
Oh, let me try it again. Hold on.
All right.
Put your face back up on there.
All right, perfect. So can everyone, I guess, can you see my screen?
I do.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let me load up. So I've got, so the first thing, so Blaine showed you the very basic project that you create a repository on your own local computer. The reality is you're probably not going to do that. You're going to collaborate with other people. That's the majority part. And the really nice thing with Git is there's tons of sites out there that help you do this sort of collaboration. And a lot of these sites I'm going to go over should not be new to people. They should have heard about it by now. And the reason why I want to use one of these sites as almost like Blaine talked, the source of truth, or as the main repository, is because they have so much more bundled into them. It's not just a server. They've almost socialized it in the sense that they have issue tracking, project management, merge tools, all these things all built in to make your life a lot easier. So I don't really recommend people just running a very simple, basic Git server on their laptop or on a server at work and then have everyone connect to it. You're not really getting all the benefits out of Git. So what most people do is they subscribe up to popular sites such as Bitbucket and GitHub, and I'll talk about them in a second, and then use those to help your build process. And there are different pricing models. You can actually, a lot of people don't know this, but you can actually have enterprise editions of all these sites that install locally within your organization, and again, reap all the benefits of it. So the first, I'm just going to show you a couple of them, and these are the most popular ones. There are other ones out there, but I think most developers end up using them. So Bitbucket, it's a product from Atlassian. All of these have free and paid models. So this one, the pricing model is pretty much, you can have unlimited private repositories. So there's this concept of private versus public. Public is probably what you get to search online. Private is only you or your group gets to see it. And it's free up to 5 users. After that, you really pay on a per user basis. GitHub, this one I think most people have heard about. If you haven't, I'm not sure where you've been for the last 5 years or so, it is probably the de facto where most developers code in, and especially open source projects. They're pretty much all hosted on GitHub. They've changed their pricing model recently, and it's a pay per user thing. They have free public repositories, and then if you have private repositories, you no longer pay for private repositories, you pay for groups. GitLab is another one. I've never really used it. I know some people like it. I just wanted to point it out. I didn't really understand their full pricing model, but there is paid and free version.
One bonus for GitLab is GitLab is open source itself.
Okay. My personal favorite is GitHub. There's just so much bundled in there. It's worth it. I'm a real big fan of it. So we're going to use GitHub for the rest. And what I'm going to show you is a open source project we're working on, and I'm going to go through the actual process that we use GitHub to start from a task and go all the way to completion. And this will involve some Git knowledge and also just understanding how to actually work with Git as a whole. So the first thing is you'll notice that so the project's called actually ODTUG. It's a product from our open source. It's still in beta. We're looking actually for beta testers, and it is a utility source for PL SQL. And the first thing you normally do is when you start a project or you start a task is you create an issue. Similar to if you use Jira, you would create a Jira ticket or some sort of ticketing engine. You usually always want to code against an issue. If you remember, Blaine was showing his Git Commit messages. Well, the reason why you don't really need to write long ones is most of the time you document the business problem or some of the longer solutions actually with the ticket. So issues, think of them as tickets. So we're going to create a new ticket, and we're just going to call it ODTUG demo. And I might put in some notes here, A, B, C, D, F, whatever. And you can apply labels like bugs, documentation, etc. I won't do any of that. Milestones are almost like releases, which milestone you want to do, and you can assign it to multiple developers. So I'm just going to submit the first issue, and now I have this issue that says, hey, we've got to do something. Actually, let me just change here. I'll just put this, change the help on the page. Okay. So now we have this issue, and this issue now is on this project site called Aura Open Source, and I have admin access to it, so we're going to actually use two different browsers, but I'm going to come in now with me in Safari, and I'm going to go to auraopensource.com and then find the OSUtils project, and I see this issue, right? ODTUG demo, and says, hey, I've got to change this help, and I want to change it, but I don't have direct write access to it. So what you would do is something called fork, and forking is more of this cloud-based concept where it copies and links the repositories to my personal profile. So I'm going to fork this into my personal profile here, and now you'll notice at the top I am in my personal repository with the exact same name, OSUtils. And not only that, is it tells me where the fork comes. So it's almost like a pointer to where the directory is. And I've got the exact same source code. And the point of forking is allows me to work on the code, not affect the main repository, and then submit change requests or changes that I've done. So now what I've got, but this project doesn't exist on my computer. So I'm just pulling up my notes here. This just exists in GitHub, and you can actually go with GitHub. The really nice thing is I can go in here, and I could actually edit this file by clicking the edit icon. It gives a simple text thing, but editing text in the web browser is good, but it's just not there yet. I actually want to edit it on my computer, and I also want to, let's say, do a build process or something. So most of the time you don't usually edit in Bitbucket or GitHub. You actually want on your computer, and this is where cloning comes in. It's actually saying, I want to copy from this server to my local machine, or a clone is a local copy on your machine. So I'm going to go into command line here, and Okay, so I've got this thing called Git clone, and Blaine already showed it, and I'm going to copy from this repository. Again, notice that it's from my personal repository. So any changes I make here are perfectly okay. They have nothing, they will not affect the main project page. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually open this directory in my favorite text editor, and let's just find, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. So now I've got this project in my text editor. This should look pretty simple. So I'm going to go to the top here, and let's just put live from ODTUG webinar. Right? This is the change I want to make. So I've hit save, and let's go back here and let's do a GS for Git Status, and you'll see that this is very similar to what Blaine showed. What I'm going to do is just quickly show you a GUI version of this, and this is open. So let's just find utils, and this is the GUI version of essentially Git. It's a product called SourceTree from Atlassian, and it's a free tool, very similar to Tortoise for SVN. This is probably the de facto one. It's available for, I think, Linux, Mac, Windows, so all the operating systems. Very good. And here you can see the diff.
There is no Linux version. I went to try that last night.
Oh, okay.
There's a very long thread asking for a Linux version, but so far, no version.
Maybe it's time to get a Mac. That's what they're trying to tell you. But so I think most people either have a Mac or a Windows, so this is it. I think there is a Trent Schaefer could probably tweet out after if there's a Linux version of a Git GUI one, if he's listening. So anyways, you can do this. So I'm actually going to commit this via the GUI just to show you a different way. And you'll see that staging files is simply as clicking them, and now it goes into the stage file thing, very similar to typing out all the commands. And then the comments, let me find, what I want to do is find the ticket number that was in here. So it's 103. What I might do is in the comments, I will put in, I'll put in hashtag 103. Hashtag is like the link to the comment, and I'll just put minor change. And I'm going to select this thing called push, changes immediately, and what that's going to do is push it up to the server. Now again, this will really push to the GitHub server, and it will push under my account, not the Aura open source account. So I'm going to hit commit. And if I go to my project page and I refresh this,
so one thing to point out there is that with the GUI tool, he saved about half of the commands that I was typing in to do the same thing. At least half the commands were all done by one button.
Yeah, and I still actually use command line a lot for these sort of things, but I like the GUI tool to usually verify all the files I'm doing and all the diffs. You just can't beat that in command lines to verify the diffs on that. So everyone, you can see the change I made live from ODTUG webinar. And if we go actually to the main project page, though, and I refresh it just to highlight this, you're not going to see this change, right? Nothing has happened yet because I've only affected my copy, that forked copy that's referred to. And now how do I get my change from my personal account back into the main project account? And so this is where that collaboration comes in. It's called a pull request, or if you Google it, a lot of people just write PR. And this is a lot of people get this mixed up, myself included. And a pull request, don't view it as from you pulling. You're requesting the owner to make a pull from your from your copy to their copy. And that's why it's a pull request. It's, can you pull from my thing because I fixed it? And I'll show you what that looks like. You can do it straight from the GUI. There are ways to do this from command line, I believe, but the GUI is probably the easiest way. And I'll just do a new pull request here. It's going to show me all the changes I've made. Now, I've only made one change, but had I made a bunch of changes, it will show all the changes that I've made and that I want to submit. Where's the button? And then here I can just click Create Pull Request. So I'm going to call it, and I'll just put in this notes 103 ODTUG demo. actually I'll just put here, and I'll create the pull request. Again, this is in my personal account. Now I'm going to go into the project account, and you'll see that there's 3 pull requests. This is the one we just did, so I can click on it as project owner, and this is what project owners do, and they'll say, oh, this change came in, it's linked to this ticket, so if I click on 103, I can see actually why they were trying to do what they were trying to do. I can actually look at the changes quickly to say, hey, does this make sense? Right? And I can see, yeah, I can edit it. You can actually make social comments on each line. So if you're doing code reviews, this is a great way to do it. But I won't go into that too much. But for now, I'll just say, you know what, it looks good. Let's accept it. So I'm going to merge the pull request, confirm merge, and it's done. So in my ticket here, or sorry, that's closed, but if I go back to my ticket 103, I'll see that there's this commit that came in, and it was also part of this merge. And now if we go back to the main code page, you're going to see this change that I made live from ODTUG demo. And that's the basic thing of how it all works. Most people, when you're getting started with Git or GitHub, they don't actually manage public repositories for teams. They just contribute to projects, and I just wanted to show you what people that manage projects actually see, and also you as an end user, if you want to contribute to projects, that's actually how to do it, just through issue management and submitting a pull request.
Now, keep in mind that it's not, you don't even actually have to do code to contribute to a project. Just submitting an issue saying, hey, I was troubleshooting, I found a bug. That's very, very helpful. If you see a typo in a documentation, you don't have to be a programmer to contribute to an open source project. Just be active in the project, and that is a huge benefit for the project right there.
Absolutely, and if you look at this project OS Utils, when we first started, I said, hey, can you guys just submit some ideas or bug fixes, etc. And if you actually look, you can see Vincent's here, a fellow Insummer, but there are other people that have submitted issues. We've actually cleaned up a lot of them. A lot of them are left for me, but you can see everyone contributing issues, and you're right, Blaine, there's some people that don't have time or don't even have the skill, which is fine, but saying, hey, I really would like this feature in here. And the only way for other people to know if that feature should exist is by you submitting an issue. So I highly recommend that you do those sort of things. You just contribute. And the cool thing with GitHub now is you can actually upvote it a bit by selecting a reaction. So I'm just going to click the +1, and that could be also your contribution. So if you see a ticket that a lot of other people that you like, that you think, hey, this is exactly what I want, someone's already written it, I'm just going to +1 it, and it gives the project owner an idea to say, hey, there's a lot of interest in it, and that's all it takes to help contribute to the community. So there's just under 10 minutes left. We still don't have any questions. If you do, now's a really good time to ask. I can go into just some tips and tricks with Git and also working with GitHub for if you're planning to work on a project or community-based project. Blaine, is there anything you wanted to talk about before we went into that?
Martin, there are a couple of questions in the chat box. I think there's 3 of them in there now.
I'm not
seeing the chat box either.
Oh, okay, I just saw Karen post. I'm seeing it now.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question is, what is the difference between fork and clone? And that's an excellent question. It's still sometimes a little blurry to me, but let me just pull up my notes. The best way of thinking of forking a project is copying your project from one online repository to another. So in this case, what we did is we copied the Aura open source OS Utils project, and I copied and synced it to my personal account. Oh, I have to go back, but I copied it to my personal account, and that's the fork. Where a clone, though, a clone is, again, is a copy of the project on my local machine. So the fork was from one GitHub account to another, if you want to think of it, and then the clone is from here that landed back onto my desktop. So this is the cloned copy. If I do this, I'm up to date, but I'm working now off the cloned copy.
Yeah, and
Next
also
question.
working can also be, let's say me and Martin are working together on a project and everything's nice and we're in sync with everything, and then we reach a point on a feature and we disagree. And so this is why sometimes forking can sometimes have a negative connotation, but basically if we decide we want to go in different directions, we can actually fork the project, and now they're two separate projects. And forking and cloning are very similar in the terms of GitHub. When you fork it that way, that's usually meaning I want to make a copy and contribute back to the original. Clone just means make me a copy that I'm going to work on. But there's also that negative definition for forking. But don't get those confused. In GitHub, forking is a very good thing.
Okay. Yeah, and exactly, like that's the really nice thing with GitHub. Depending on the terms of license, you have to always watch that. Most of the time it's pretty open. You can branch off. Let's say you're not happy with this project altogether. You want to change the direction. You can go and do whatever you want with it. And then you're no longer going to get updates, or you can get updates, but odds are they're going to reject your changes back. So it's, for the most part, people do it for updates.
Read and understand the license first.
Yes. So someone else has a question. Is there a GUI that can be used with GitHub, like Atlassian source tree? GitHub actually has its own GUI. I think I have it. It's GitHub Desktop. I believe they have a Windows version. I don't use it that often. It's not that great. Compared to Atlassian source tree, it's not very good. But if you're starting off and you like it, go ahead. But that's all I can really say about it.
One thing that I think there might be a little bit of confusion in that question also. Think of GitHub, the repository itself, as a remote repository. So with SourceTree, you can pull from GitHub in SourceTree to your local machine, make your changes, and push back to GitHub, and just use GitHub as a remote repository. And so SourceTree does work just fine with GitHub for the coding aspects. It's the other features like the issues and the forking and all of that. That's not integrated with something like SourceTree. So you would still use those features on the GitHub website, but you can work with the code repository directly in SourceTree, if that clarifies a little bit.
Yeah, and for the majority of part, when I do development, it's all on my computer, and only when I do those forking or some of the merging do I actually go to GitHub. So it's not as big of an issue as people may think it is, because some people like to do everything locally and only locally. It's just a few times that you actually have to go on GitHub and manage the project in that sense. Someone asked a question that they installed SourceTree and they're having some problems cloning the repository. I don't think I can answer that without some more information. I would definitely suggest Google or
Let me make an attempt on that one. Just based on the wording of the question, if you have a local Git repository, that means the Git repository is on your machine. You're not going to clone that. You already have that. Cloning is for when you have a remote repository, like in your company server or on GitHub. You clone that repository down and then start working on it. If you do have a local Git repository, you just open that repository in SourceTree. You wouldn't clone them. If you just started the file, so going all the way back to when I started my piece, if you remember I did the init, if you just started typing in files and you haven't initialized the Git repository yet, I'm not sure of how to do that with SourceTree. I don't use SourceTree myself, but you do need to do a Git init, and then that makes it a Git repository, and then you can open it in SourceTree without doing a clone.
Yeah. The next question is, someone mentioned that I talked about we need some beta testers for OS Utils. How can you get involved? It's just go to this project page, so I'll post it out in the chat right now, and just really install it on a system you have, probably a dev system, and give it a kick of the tires. See what you think, if there's any features you'd like, any bugs you found. The API is very stable right now. we're probably going to just tweak one or two things, so I don't recommend pushing this all the way through prod, but for the most part for development, it's a safe build to actually use for development. But again, what we'd love to see from you is to create issues at the bare minimum saying, hey, I did this, I've got a bug, it didn't install, or I had a problem once it installed or with a certain package, or I'd like to see this feature request. The next question I had was, is there a process flow diagram for Git? If you actually Google Atlassian tutorials, there are some amazing documents on this, and they have some great workflow of like how a branch actually works, the commit numbers, all of that. I know that Git SCM has some great Git documentation. For people that are starting, I think this is the place you want to go, is this Atlassian tutorials. Maybe I'll post it out now to, I can't post it out, but just Google Atlassian Git tutorials, right? If you Google that, it's going to be your first hit.
GitHub itself also has some great documentation, and sometimes on Git there's another thing, on GitHub there's another thing called GISTs, G-I-S-Ts. So sometimes you'll find tutorials in there, sometimes it's example code, but if you go on GitHub they also have some great documentation.
So the next question is it possible to use almost like a GitHub on a local repository? There's, again, you could use GitLab and manage it through there. If you're an enterprise, I'd recommend buying the GitHub Enterprise Edition. It really just depends on how far you want to take it. I'd first ask why you wouldn't want to put it on GitHub, and even if it's a private repo, why you don't want to pay for it. It's just such a better service, or such a good service. It's backed up. It has so many integrated tools, so I'd recommend that. But again, if for whatever reason there are very edge cases that you need it only on your computer, maybe check out GitLab if you're not allowed to buy, if you don't have, or if you don't have the money to buy the GitHub Enterprise, because I think that gets fairly pricey.
Right. And
Next
GitLab,
question.
like I mentioned before, is open source, so you can contribute to that as well and make it better.
Someone asked, for managing fairly active projects, would you recommend branching or forking the project among team members? This just depends. So at Or Open Source, we have, so I can show you a project, for instance, that Insum works on, and Vincent Morneau is heavily active in this project. So this project's called Apex Diff, for the Oracle Apex users that are out there. Never heard of it? Or no, not Apex Diff, sorry, Apex Feb. Let me just pull that. Apex Front-End Boost. If you're an Apex developer, you want to know about this project. Really, really great project. Here is something that Or Open Source is the host for it. Insum's a sponsor. Vincent works on it primarily. We could have multiple situations where Vincent would have to do pull requests every single time. In this case, it doesn't make sense because Vincent's the guy that works on it most of the time. So I've actually given him access, so he has full write access. But for instance, if Blaine wanted to submit some code to this, because Blaine, let's say pretend I don't know Blaine, or Blaine doesn't contribute often, I wouldn't give him access, and he'd have to actually merge, submit a pull request.
I do have a pull request in Logger that you accepted.
Okay, yes, there's a lot of pull Logger. There's a massive backlog, and that's for different reasons more on my end. As for committing to branches or forks, it really just depends on how you want to manage your projects. For something like Front-End Boost, we just push the changes to the main thing because we want users to get the latest and greatest right away. For more stable projects such as Logger, we're actually going to look at moving to developing only on branches and then porting the changes back in.
Yeah, we kind of brushed over branching and merging because there are books written about the best way to do branching and merging, and everybody has their favorite opinion. So the best thing you can do as far as branching merging goes, go out and read what other people are doing and see what will work for your project. If it works for you and you'll actually do it, use that process. That's the best one if you'll do it.
Yeah, and really understand the business problem that you're trying to solve. So for instance, Front-End Boost, we always want to push the latest and greatest out there. So it doesn't really make sense to create a branch for every fix. Some people do even branches for every single ticket. Maybe that's overkill for what you want. For a more quote-unquote stable project, if we go to Logger, for instance, Logger is is used around the world in massive organizations. Because of that, and it's in the database, it's across production, I can't push in changes that I'm half sure of. In this case, this is why we're actually going to be looking at creating release branches so that we can work safely in an area, and then the main site still has safe production-ready code. Again, it all depends. So different projects will have different business needs. Someone asked if I could demo the clone repo to a fork. If we think about it, all I did was, this is my clone here, and I made a change. If we want to push it to the fork, it's just as simple as a push. So if I go, let's just...
While you're doing that, I'll cover some terminology again. The first thing was you go to the original project and you fork that into your personal GitHub, and then now your personal GitHub has a copy of the project, at which point you go onto your local machine and you do a clone of your personal GitHub. So you clone it down to your machine, you make your changes, you push those back up to your personal GitHub, and at that point you do the pull request back into the original project.
Exactly. So to be technical, to answer this person's question, was all I did was I made a change. I've added the file. GA and GCM are just some shortcuts I've got in my command line for git add and git commit message. All I did was I worked on my clone, my copy on my local desktop, and then by pushing up here, I have pushed the change to my fork. That's what the question asked, and that's what I'm demoing. The last part would be then in my personal, this is my forked copy on GitHub here. What I'd actually do then is, you can see I've got another change. I would then make a new pull request and submit the pull request from there. So it's just 5 minutes after. I think we just went a bit over time, so I just want to wrap up saying thank you to everyone for coming to the webinar. You can follow Blaine on Twitter. I believe it's Blaine Carter, or at Blaine Carter.
Or a Blaine OS.
Okay. Or you can just Google Blaine Carter Twitter. You'll find him. You can find myself at Martin D'Souza. The last thing I want to just mention is a conference from ODTUG called Kscope. If you've never been to it, it's really probably the best developer conference out there for Oracle developers. The next one is going to be in San Antonio, Texas. You can get more information at kscope17.com. I'd strongly recommend looking at registering soon, because we do have early bird registration open.
And it fills up fast. And I do want to apologize again for seeming unprepared. I'm very prepared on that machine over there.
All right, well, thank you very much, Blaine. Thanks for all the attendees, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.